Hey guys, Buff and Gaming back today, bringing you a video, and today we're going to be discussing the meta and TTK problems currently plaguing Warzone here in the mid of Season 2 of the Cold War integration here for Call of Duty's Warzone. So I'm going to be doing this video, I'm going to be piggybacking really off of the TheTacticalBrit's video. I'll put the video description, or the link in the description down below for the video that he titles the TTK. Warzone has a TTK problem, and I definitely recommend watching that because he presents really the evidence for his reasoning very clearly and concisely. He explains everything, gives evidence, and I think it's a very, very good video. So I watched that, and it triggered this idea to kind of piggyback off that and build upon what he was saying, just describe it a little bit more to you guys as well, and really some changes that could potentially happen here coming up in the mid-season for Season 2 of Cold War integration for Warzone, as well as going forward into Season 3 and beyond, especially when we have some competitors coming up here for other games here at the end of the year, specifically Battlefield. So I'll link his video down below in the description, the TacticalBrit. Go ahead and check him out. Great video. I highly recommend watching that. Jumping into the topic here of conversation, the TTK problem in Warzone and the meta problem. I think they're almost one and the same for the most part. If we look back at Season 3 of Call of Duty Modern Warfare, last March, 1 year ago, is really around the time when Call of Duty's Warzone was introduced. It was in the mid or the beginning of Season 3 of Modern Warfare's season system. So around that time, obviously it was a brand new game. Everyone still didn't know what the best weapons were, and everybody had to figure that out. But looking back, we can still see what the data was for the TTK for a lot of those weapons. And if we look at something like the M4, which around that time, I believe it had been nerfed previously for multiplayer for Modern Warfare, but at the time, it was still a very, very good weapon, if not one of the best weapons to utilize in Warzone. That's really something that I used day one of Warzone as well, was the M4 before switching and finding my M13 build that I really enjoyed. But the M4... the TTK for the M4 was a 0.59 at close range within about 25 to 30 meters and a 0.86 at longer ranges outside of 25 to 30 meters. That was the TTK. And then we look at other weapons like the AS Val, which obviously was introduced in Season 6, so that was a little bit later. But the TTK for that is 0.407 seconds, which currently is the fastest TTK weapon in the game. And then we look at the AMAX, the CR56 AMAX, which I believe was also a Season 6 weapon, or maybe it was a Season 5 weapon, I don't remember off the top of my head, but that has a TTK of 0.76 seconds at close range within 30 meters, and then outside of that range, it has a TTK of 0.571 milliseconds. So again, the TTKs there seem very balanced. Even if we look at something like the MP5, which was the Modern Warfare's MP5, really built as an SMG, obviously 9mm Parabellum, depending on the ammo attachments, within that 20 to 25 meter range, had a TTK of 0.526 seconds. So we look at that, the gunfights really back then, especially in Season 3 when the game came out, were a lot more drawn out. And this is, again, really what the TacticalBrit covers and brings up, is this discussion of that you had time to react because of the TTKs of the Modern Warfare weapons back then. Also, there was the element of people not knowing the right attachments to use, but once those were figured out, you still had these TTKs that I just mentioned. So firefights would be a little bit more drawn out. You always had time to react, as well as get into these long drawn-out firefights where you're going to be healing, shooting. People were not really getting downed almost instantly. And then we fast forward to kind of today, and we look at kind of the TTKs for some of these weapons now, and just how these weapons are balanced are what we'll look at. The FFAR and the AUG are current meta right now in Call of Duty Warzone here in Season 2 of the Cold War integration. And the FFAR has a TTK of 0.467 milliseconds. And then outside of that 30 or 50 meter range where it drops off is 0.6 seconds. So if we compare that close range of 0.467 milliseconds to the AS Val at 0.407 seconds of the TTK. Now, keep in mind the AS Val has a 30 round magazine. It fires 9 by 39 millimeter. Okay, so this is a big, heavy round, and it's firing at 900 rounds per second, or per minute. 900 rounds per minute. The FFAR fires around 1,000 rounds per minute in game, and it's firing 5.56 by 45 millimeter NATO round. So it's a much smaller round, firing a little bit faster than the AS Val. However, the AS Val, rightfully so, is the highest TTK weapon in the game because of the cartridge it's firing. But if we look at the FFAR, it handles it. The TTK is second in the game, first off, behind the AS Val. So the AS Val is number one, and then the FFAR is number 2. So the FFAR firing at 1,000 rounds per minute. What is the balance for the weapon? Because currently, obviously, a lot of the attachments are bugged with Cold War integration, which is really another topic as to how everything was implemented. But the attachments are bugged when the FFAR has a 50-round magazine compared to the AS Valve's 30-round magazine. So the FFAR 50-round magazine, it has the mobility that is better than any SMG in the game, and TTK that's faster than any SMG in the game. And you don't have any penalty for ADSing with that 50-round magazine, whereas if you look at something like an M4 or an M13 that also fire that same cartridge from Modern Warfare, that 5.56 by 45 millimeter, you're going to notice an ADS penalty when you're aiming down sights with a 50-round or even a 60-round magazine for a lot of those weapons. So if you look at the pros and cons, how weapons are balanced, what do certain weapons do very well and what do they do bad? It seems as if now, specifically once the Cold War integration took place, a lot of the Cold War weapons kind of do everything better than every other weapon for the most part, minus the times when they had the changes to the agency suppressors. But outside of that, the Cold War weapons almost do everything better than the Modern Warfare weapons, and that's obviously specific weapons. We're talking the DMR, the MAC-10, the AUG and the FFAR, the M16, and I'm sure there's some other ones in there too that you could mention that would take over if these were had to be changes. But the TTK is so fast, especially if we look at the FFAR, has very little recoil compared to the Cold War multiplayer counterpart that it is derived from, which has pretty heavy recoil. For 1,000 rounds per minute, you'd expect the rifle to have pretty drastic recoil that if you're going to be shooting at 1,000 rounds per minute with that fast TTK, you really better be able to control that recoil in that vertical muzzle climb if you're going to let that thing rip at full auto, because it has such a high rate of fire. And that would allow for balance for allowing it to be only effective within a certain amount of meters, that being probably that 25 meter mark. If you're going to try and shoot anybody outside of that range, you're not going to be able to control the vertical recoil because it fires so quickly and you won't be able to control that recoil. So unfortunately, that's not the way it's balanced. Right now, the FFAR in Warzone has no recoil, and you can beam people out to 100 meters and still get that TTK of 0.6 seconds if you're hitting your shots. Now, this is obviously taking into account only chest shots, not headshot multipliers or anything like that for any of these TTKs that I've mentioned, but that's a very, very fast TTK, especially at ranges for a weapon that is an assault rifle, 50-round magazine, and it doesn't really have any cons to it. You can utilize it for close quarter situations and long range situations, and that's why a lot of people right now are pairing it with the AUG, because the AUG as well as the M16 are pretty much broken as well with their TTKs, and right now you can two-burst somebody with those weapons. And if we compare the burst weapons like the AUG and the M16 from the Cold War integration to maybe some burst weapons in Modern Warfare that you can use in Warzone, that being the FR556, which is the FAMAS, which is a modern-day derivative of the FAMAS, versus the Cold War version. Now, the FR556 is a 3-burst weapon. We also have the the AN94, which has the hyperburst feature, so you can toggle it to a 2-burst or utilize that 2-burst when you go fully auto. The first 2 rounds will come out of the barrel at 1,800 rounds per minute. So very fast rate of fire. However, those burst weapons are extremely ineffective, especially compared to the Cold War versions, where the bullet spread on those bursts is very, very low. So you can burst somebody out to 100, 200 meters with the AUG or the M16 from Cold War and get all 3 bullets relatively on target if you're using the right attachments for those weapons. Now, on the flip side, if you try to do that with the Modern Warfare weapons, the bullet spread, especially on the FR556, is not tight at all, and you're going to be lucky anything outside of 50 meters to hit one of those 3 bullets. And then the AN94, a very high skill weapon, and you're not really rewarded for it if you're utilizing that burst feature within the correct ranges. Anything outside of 30 meters, the damage really, really drops off for that weapon. And again, the accuracy of the burst and just the TTK for the weapons are not even comparable. I have an example that I'll be showing in a future video here coming up for the AN94, where I was bursting a guy with a hyperburst and utilizing some of the fully automatic features of the AN94 out in the open. Broke armor a bunch of times, and he just kept peeking me, and he peeked me once and literally 2-burst me with an AUG before I could even react. And this is the 2-burst for the AUG. Another issue on top of the fact that there's no bullet spread, there's very little to no vertical recoil whatsoever as well, is that there's very little delay between bursts. So the balance there really kind of goes out the window with these Cold War weapons because they kind of do everything really, really well, and they do very little bad. So there's no downsides or negatives to using these weapons. Whereas in Modern Warfare, for the most part, minus some of the metas that we saw with something like the Grau or the Bruin, obviously this has been a problem with TTK for a while now, is weapons coming out that aren't correctly balanced with a lot of these season weapons that we're seeing. And again, it started in Season 4 or 5 when everyone's finally caught on to the Grau, and then the Bruin, and eventually the Kilo, which the Kilo obviously we know had damage drop-off issues. It really didn't have any damage drop-off whatsoever outside of those ranges, so you kept the same TTK almost for any range, which made it such an issue to deal with, and why it was such a powerhouse and clearly broken. But the Grau and the Bruin, they still had very fast TTKs and very little recoil, yet high rate of fire. So if we're looking at balance-wise, if a weapon has high rate of fire, something like the Grau and the Bruin, very, very fast rate of fire on those weapons in-game, very, very little recoil. So you'd expect to balance that out, that it would take a little bit longer to kill targets, especially at ranges. And that's unfortunately not what we saw when those weapons were introduced. So I'm not sure if Raven has been working on the Warzone balancing of the TTKs and weapons since the beginning, or if they took over from Infinity Ward at some point. But this has really been a problem since Season 4 or 5 of Modern Warfare, when the Warzone started. So Modern Warfare's integration into Warzone Season 4 and 5, and then Cold War, it seems to continue now. So I'm not sure when Raven took over, or if they've been doing the whole time. One thing I suspect is that they obviously have a lot of store bundles that they want to sell, so maybe one of the plans that they're going with is, okay, we're going to have these new weapons. They're going to be a little bit better, a little bit unbalanced. That will sell them in the store, and then it will allow people to spend more money, also incentivize them to purchase the games for the multiplayer to level these weapons up to utilize them in Warzone. So I think that's a fair assumption, which is a smart business decision. However, the fix for that I can see is, instead of doing that, why not just actually balance the weapons correctly, have correct pros and cons for the weapons. That way you can sell all sorts of bundles. People are incentivized to use different loadouts, use different weapons to experiment, and there's no specific meta that's locked down to 2, 3, or even 4 weapons. It would allow players to really experiment and then say, hey, there's a really cool AK blueprint in the store. I'm going to go ahead and buy that for Warzone because, you know what, things are pretty balanced. It fires a pretty big cartridge, and it's still going to put people down if I'm hitting my shots. And really the balance-wise, we're looking at that, isn't really existent currently. Now, the Warzone integration obviously broke this, I think, up to a whole nother level, because you have weapons that have incorrect descriptions for a lot of the attachments. The TTKs are clearly too fast for some of these weapons. If you look at the FFAR, there's really no downsides to that weapon like we discussed. You can just beam this thing up to 100 meters. You can use it close range more effectively than any SMG in the game because of the TTK. And if we look at that cartridge-wise compared to the AS Val with this 9x39mm, it doesn't really make sense that it has that fast of TTK for the rate of fire. And even if it did, if it should have that fast rate of fire, which is 1,000 rounds per minute, as well as that high TTK, which is fair enough, it should have very, very heavy recoil. That way, you can only use it in specific situations. It doesn't make it this very well-rounded do-all weapon. You have to really take it out in certain situations. And looking back at, like I said, a lot of the Modern Warfare weapons, I was using the SCAR the other day, and the SCAR fills a very specific niche in Warzone. Everyone thinks it sucks. I hate on it quite a bit as well because I think it should be better. But it does one or two things very, very, very well. It does them better than, I would argue, a lot of the weapons in the game to date, even better than some of the Graus and other weapons like that. However, it doesn't hold a candle to something like an AUG or an FFAR. But what it does do, it does it very, very well. And that's really utilizing the bipod foregrip, being able to crouch or prone when you're shooting this thing, and having good accuracy to be rewarded by hitting those large caliber shots. Now, again, if you're going to go up against any sort of meta weapon, which is the meta problem with this TTK, is the AUG, the FFAR, the DMR, and the Type 63 can still be very, very annoying, as well as the MAC-10. Going up against any of those with any Modern Warfare weapon, if you're in a gunfight face-to-face, you're going to lose that almost all the time based on the TTK numbers, unless you're using something like an AS Val. But it really takes away from players' abilities to experiment with different loadouts. Now, me and myself, I obviously do that all the time, but honestly, I would be a much, much better player and have a much better TTK and win percentage if I just use the same weapons everybody else uses. Unfortunately, I don't like to do that, which is my personal choice. However, there's really no incentive to make players want to use anything else outside of the 3 or 4 weapons that are currently in Warzone. So that's definitely my take on this. I feel like the TTKs definitely need to be readjusted here with the Cold War integrations. I understand they most likely want people to buy some of these bundles, buy the game, so they can level up and use these weapons in Warzone. However, the problem is here that Battlefield is coming later this year, and assuming DICE and EA have stepped up and they are delivering what we expect to be a modern shooter, and in the press they've said, EA has and DICE have stated that this year's Battlefield is going to be a love letter to the fans. And so we kind of know a lot about this game without knowing a lot, and we can assume it's going to be a modern or a modern-ish type shooter, and it's going to largely resemble Battlefield 3, which was one of the best-selling Battlefields of all time up to a certain point. And I would argue Battlefield 3 is the best Battlefield of all time when we look at longevity and playstyle and the theme that game set and the feeling you got by playing that. I could go back today and play Battlefield 3, especially Battlefield 4, and it would be almost as if it was released today. Those are still very, very good games. Tons of fun to play. We see things like with Battlefield 3's Venice Unleashed, which is a fan-made project. They're introducing a Battle Royale. So later this year, Battlefield's going to be coming out, and assuming they have a Battle Royale, whether it's at launch or later, it's going to be a direct competitor with every Call of Duty, as well as Warzone specifically, if it does have a Battle Royale. And I think the first sign of anything else coming to compete with Modern Warfare, or Warzone, I should say, Activision and Call of Duty are in for a rude awakening, we'll put it, because they really have had no competitor. They've been able to get away with lack of updates, lack of communication with the fans, and lack of adjusting these weapons. The fact that some of these weapons have been broken the way they were for the amount of time they were, such as the DMR and the MAC-10, clearly being broken for over a month and a half at the point where they finally patched it twice to finally fix it for the most part, is kind of very, very odd to me that they would allow something so clearly broken to go on for so long. But I really want to know what you guys think down below. The TTK problem, I think there really needs to be a rework with the TTK for a lot of the Cold War weapons. There needs to be more drastic pros and cons for the weapons. I understand it's obviously hard when you have all of these different attachments mixing and mashing with what we have already established with Modern Warfare. I'm sure all of this integration of the weapons was done very, very last minute, and it was rushed. But it seems to be there really isn't any changes happening to the weapons, to the attachments. I don't think we've had any weapon patches whatsoever since that last DMR patch that we had back in mid-season 1 at that point. There hasn't been anything drastic at this point, minus the agency suppressors that they reverted changes and then re-implemented the changes. I'd really like to see much more consistent communication from Raven, as well as more consistent weapon balancing. These weapons should not be broken like this for so long. And then we look at other weapons that are just kind of existing out there, like something like the Holger 26. Always fun to use it as a G36. However, the recoil is horrendous. It's worse than the Scar. It's worse than some of the other heavy machine guns like the PKM, the M91, those LMGs that fire much larger calibers than the G36. With the G36 fires a 5.56x45 NATO, which is the same as the FFAR, yet it has horrible TTK and extreme recoil for something that's firing the same caliber. Granted, one's a bullpup, one isn't, but we're looking at the same bullet here. One bullet of 5.56 doesn't do something different than another bullet of 5.56. So there definitely needs to be more consistent balancing with these weapons. Let me know down below what you guys think of this. I'm just remembering back to Season 3 when you could run things like the SR25 build that I've covered here on this channel, and I could do those videos like the best DMR in Warzone, those being the M4A1 kitted out as a DMR with the SOCOM rounds and a variable zoom sight, which was more effective than any sniper rifle in the game for a long amount of time. And then we started getting these introduction of these weapons, even in Modern Warfare Season 5 and 6, these weapons that have very fast rated fires, very low recoil, and very fast time to kills, that being the Grau, the Bruin, the Kilos, and really just kind of curbed that, so it really eliminated a lot of weapons from your repertoire. You can't use anything unique now because you have these weapons that will beam you without recoil from very long ranges, and there's no downsides to that. If we look at like the Grau, for example, in Season 5, it did extreme damage, no recoil, and no damage drop-off at all out to very, very long ranges, something beyond any range that you'd be in any firefight in. you're getting extreme damages all the way out to, I think it was something insane. We'll say 500 meters for now, just for, I'll throw that number out there, versus these other weapons. So how do you compete with that if a weapon is a laser beam and has extreme damage with no recoil? Very hard to compete with that. So really, like I said, it narrowed the meta, and now we've seen that trend continue into Cold War integration here in Season 2. I think Activision, Raven, whatever studio is in charge of this definitely needs to start implementing more updates and correct course quickly, because competitors are definitely going to be coming, specifically Battlefield. And I think a lot of the fans seem to be upset with Warzone. I love Warzone, but it definitely needs more consistent updates to the game. And I think the first sign of a competitor, specifically Battlefield, coming back after 3 years, I'm expecting very big things. And I think Warzone's going to be in for a rude awakening, especially if rumors are true with Call of Duty 2021 being a World War II themed game. Not sure how that would work with Warzone integration, but I think at that point, a lot of players would just be well over anything Warzone at that point until they rework another version and make a lot of changes. Not sure if it's a lot of engine implementations or limitations that allow them to not make these changes, what the issue is, but we need more consistent updates. And I just thought it was interesting to build off, like I said, the TacticalBrit's video, who did a better job of describing the issue than I did, but I believe the summary is that the time to kills for the Modern Warfare weapons were mostly balanced before the Cold War integration, and then at a certain point, when the Cold War integration happened, a lot of weapons were introduced with only pros and very, very little to no cons with them. So that's really the problem here. I really hope that we can see this kind of corrected, because Warzone's a lot of fun. I would love to come back and keep playing this even after Battlefield comes out. But at the rate that Warzone's going, I feel a lot of players are going to jump ship and are going to be gone forever. And that's definitely going to be me, since I prefer Battlefield. My entire life, I've always preferred Battlefield. I love Warzone, but unless they're going to be more consistent with updates and communicating to us what's going on and what they're aware of, what they're working on, what they need more time to work on, I think they're going to see a large part of the player base disappear as soon as you get a competitor like Battlefield come out. So let me know down below what you guys think of this. This is the Warzone meta and TTK problem that we see here in the mid-season of Cold War Season 2 for Warzone. Let me know down below what you think is wrong with the game, what TTKs you want to see switched, what kind of balancing you want to see done to weapons. Weapons that should have different pros, different cons. They should do some things very, very well, but you should have downsides and drawbacks if you're going to try and use those outside of that specific area that the weapon should be used in. Let me know down below what you guys think. This is Buffner Gaming. Till next time, Buffner Gaming, out.